Hello, my name is Joseph Lee, and I'm currently a sophomore at MIT studying computer science, economics, and data science. Today, I'm choosing to talk about the comma application because it'll most likely be by far the most used piece of writing that you will have in this whole entire process. I know for me, it was probably the most time-intensive thing I did during the entire application process, and I had by far the most questions, the most concerns about this part. In this video, I will be reading excerpts of my Common App essay, as well as going over the most important things that I believe you should be focusing on when you do your Common App application. First off, really hone on your introduction. Second off, I want to talk about choosing a topic for your Common App. And third off, I want to talk about being as honest as possible and really just trying not to be deceitful in your application. So first, let's talk about the introduction, and I'll start with an excerpt from my own Common App essay. I have to go. I really have to go. I was 2 minutes from catastrophe. All I could think about was the bathroom, but I couldn't raise my hand. I was too scared to speak in front of a class of judgmental 8-year-olds. Despite my bladder's protests, I continued to sit silently. As you can see, I chose to go with a pretty narrative style for my Common App essay. I can tell you that my entire essay isn't just a story. I have a lot of reflections as well as backstory and just talking in words that, aren't just in a story-like manner. But you can see here, my introduction is very narrative style, and I think that works really well for a lot of different topics, because I think when you do eventually end up choosing your topic, a lot of time it is going to be about a story. It is going to be about a certain narrative you have for your life. And by starting out with, I guess, something that helps my backstory, that's the example, something that helps set up the rest of the story, your introduction, that's a very easy avenue for you to start off with something pretty engaging that draws a reader in. I would say I spent about 30% of the time I spent on the Common App in total on just perfecting the introduction and coming up with an idea for it. I want to stress that you don't have to come up with an introduction for your essay at the very beginning. In fact, I think for most of my essays, not just the Common App essay, but for most of my essays, I actually didn't come up with my introduction until the very end. You can write out, I think the easiest parts of your essays in general to write out are the middle and sometimes the conclusion, depending on what type of essay it is. But the introduction, obviously, is usually the most important part of the essay, if we're being honest, because although I would love to tell you that admissions officers are going to read really carefully on all your papers and all your essays, if you don't have an interesting introduction, a lot of time they're just going to get bored and not really take you seriously. Obviously, most of the content that's important and that tells most of your story is going to be in the middle, but if you're not going to get their attention, most chances are that you're not going to actually get anything from them being the admissions officers. I guess I wanted this part of the essay, the introduction, to kind of spark a vivid scene in the reader's head. I could have done a better job on this, honestly, looking back with the better writing skills I have now, but I think that I painted a pretty clear picture as to what my mindset was back then, and I guess the scene that I laid out during, my kindergarten days. I definitely recommend spending a sizable amount of time on your introduction for the reasons I mentioned before, and again, please don't be afraid to delay that time until the end of your essay when you've already planned out basically all the other parts of it. Next, let's talk about choosing a meaningful and effective topic for your essay. Here's another excerpt from my Common App essay. I was so comfortable, I even started cheering during teammates' matches. Me cheering. I avoided the spotlight during class, but I welcomed the attention on court. Tennis had always been an escape from my stresses. Now it was an escape from my own silence. I wore my hat wherever I could, and I noticed changes even outside of practice. In class, I started having fun instead of worrying about calculating every decision or being too loud. This essay at its core is definitely a tennis story. You can tell by this excerpt, but it's not just your stereotypical recollection of just winning tennis matches or just quote-unquote team building, which are two examples of very overused and not very effective college essays. Tennis for me in this essay was simply kind of a gateway for me to tell my story. Tennis was, and probably right now is the biggest part of my life. And honestly, to not talk about it in my Common App essay, while not totally necessary, I felt it was almost disingenuous to not talk about it in some way, shape, or form. But the catch is that my essay is not stereotypical. Oh, we won state, and then I learned different points of friendship. I had a conflict, and I learned the importance of teamwork. It's not like that. It's kind of something that's different from the stereotypical what you would see from a sports story. And I really try to hone it in my essay. Yeah, so I mean, when you're brainstorming ideas for your essay, you don't want to necessarily think about the avenue in which you tell your story. I think that the most effective essay I had, including this Common App essay, were made when I just thought about themes throughout my life, like what's important to me, how have I developed as a person throughout my life, what type of narrative do I have for myself, What's my story? What do I think of my own story when I tell it in my own head? And then think about the events that happened in my life that form those stories, that form the narrative, and then trying to make that into your essay. I think starting with the big idea first rather than the big, I guess, scene or the events that happened first is probably the right approach. At least that worked for me. You should obviously experiment for yourself, but I think that trying that strategy is a worthwhile investment. Finally, let's talk a little bit about authenticity. Here's one more excerpt from my essay that I'll read to you right now. Things were imperfect though. Last spring, after a rough practice, my history teacher asked me about the tennis season. I immediately responded, "Coach won't listen to me, but he's surprised when we lose. It's horrible." My newfound confidence had begun to flirt with arrogance. Word got around quickly. Coach was trying his best, and my attack was unacceptable. When I passed my teammates, I could feel every mention of complainer, conceited, and big mouth cut into my spirit. I wasn't proud of myself either. This is obviously a section of the essay that doesn't show my perfect side. It's obviously something that if you just read that in a vacuum and you don't read the rest of my essay, just that excerpt itself is a pretty negative reflection of who I am. I think that this was honestly one of the most important parts of my essay. First of all, showing that I am a human and I'm not trying to portray myself in the most perfect way possible. Because obviously, in every situation, you're not going to be the one who's 100% in the right. That almost never happens in any situation. You're not always going to be 100% just like amazing, spectacular, or whatever you do. And I think that addressing that kind of in a little bit of a way was important for me to do this in this essay. Growth inherently comes from a more negative place in your life. So if you talk about being in a more negative spot and having a more negative mindset and then showing how you grew from that, how you improved from that, that's obviously a positive. And I think a lot of people can fall into this trap of thinking like, I know I got this advice from a lot of my friends and family is like, don't write anything negative about yourself. Even if you do talk about how you grew from it and you do talk about how you changed from that experience, writing about anything negative about yourself is just not a good idea. I would have to say that I personally disagree with that. I think, again, that it showed the way I grew throughout the years. It showed how I changed my mindset. And I think that one of the most effective ways you can show that you are willing to learn, willing to grow as a person is to show that you have done it in the past. And the only way you can show that you've grown in the past is to acknowledge that you came from a worse place. But I do want to make a small note here. Please do not fabricate details in your application, especially your essays. Not only is it, immoral, but honestly, think about the times that you have made up a story or have kind of made a white lie about something. Do you really think in that moment when you're speaking to someone about the white lie or you're making some sort of fabricated detail during a story that you sound nearly as convincing, nearly as passionate, nearly as emotional about that moment? You probably don't. And that probably translates into your writing. You do the same thing similarly in your comment app. If something didn't actually really happen or something didn't, like you're kind of stretching the truth, I feel like it's almost inherent that you're going to have a less strong of a voice in your essay. So I would say, please just try to stick as much as possible to the real concrete details. But yeah, that's going to be about it for this video. I really hope these tips helped you out in some way. I really hope you enjoyed this class. I wish you the best on your college application season. I'm out. Please have a beautiful rest of your day.